Welcome to So-and-So, brought to you by Bernina, Made to Create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Today we have a very special guest. From the stages of off-Broadway to the bright lights of Broadway, from his unmistakable voice to his performances in more than 30 movies, Harvey Fierstein has spent a lifetime telling stories that matter. With 4 Tony Awards to his name, he has redefined representation on stage. But beyond the accolades, there's the man, a Brooklyn-born artist whose journey has been shaped by family, resilience, and an unyielding belief in telling the truth. Harvey also has a deep love for sewing and costume design. Before becoming famous, Fierstein studied art at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, and worked as a costume designer in the off-off-Broadway world. He has spoken about his passion for sewing in interviews, reminiscing about how he used to design and create costumes for drag performers and theater productions, which helped shape his deep understanding of theatrical presentation and character development. His early work in costume design was part of his immersion in the vibrant New York theater community of the 1970s, where he collaborated with experimental and LGBTQ+ artists. Even as his career in theater took off with Torch Song Trilogy and Hairspray, sewing remained a part of his life. He's mentioned that working with fabric and creating is a meditative and creative outlet for him. He is quite the quilter, loving to experiment with both fabrics and designs. So today, we go beyond the footlights to explore the moments that made him, his early days, the influence of his parents, why Ridgefield, Connecticut became his adopted hometown, and why quilting has been an anchoring thread in his life. Harvey Fierstein, welcome to So-and-So.
Well, thank you, Meg. It's very nice to be here.
You know, it's you are a multifaceted individual, and there we could talk for hours. One of the things that brought you to this podcast was the fact that you are quite a quilter, and and I've seen pictures of your work, and it's beautiful. It'll be on our website. So I'm just going to jump right in there. There's many directions we're going to go, but we're here
Sure.
because of your sewing. So I'm going to ask, how did you first start to sew?
Well, I have an art background. I always thought, since I was a kid, I always thought I'd be a animator for Disney. I think that's what I really wanted to do as a kid. And then as I grew, I went to art school, all kinds of art school. I went to the High School of Art and Design. And it was there that I realized I had some talent, but it was never going to be Picasso. I thought I could eventually, when you're thinking of careers or whatever, I thought I could be, I could technically work in illustration or I could work in animation or something like that. I just sort of went along those lines. I went to Pratt Institute and got my BFA in painting and education. And meanwhile, this whole other theater thing happened, this writing thing. And, life is the way I look at it, it's a series of questions. People asking questions all day long. Most of the time, we don't even listen to the questions. We just ignore them, or we say no because, you want to go to dinner? No, I already have plans. You want to do this? No, we say no. But the truth is that life only changes the times you are brave enough to say yes. Not even brave. You just got to just do it. You say yes and all kinds of things happen. You say no and nothing happens. So this opportunity of theater happened, and all of a sudden I found myself in the middle of theater and all that, and doing much less artwork. Though I did through high school and college, I supported myself doing embroidery work. I made clothing there's a store in New York, it's still there, called Serendipity 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I did clothing for Jackie O, for Doc Severinsen, for John Denver. And then there was another store called Pandemonium. And for them, I painted canvases to do needlepoint. I did movie stars and opera stars and stuff like that. Of course, now that's all done by computer. You don't need an artist to paint those things, but back then, that's what I did to get myself through school. So I always had my hand in sewing. My father worked in a factory making handkerchiefs.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned to sew as a kid on I think it was a Singer, but it was a factory machine. So it only went forwards, it didn't go back. And I mean, this thing could sew through anything. He used to sew suede clothes for us and stuff. I mean, yeah, it could sew through anything. So that's what I learned to sew on. We had a big mangle to do ironing, but I didn't start quilts or anything like that until I live in a small fictional town in Connecticut, and we got a satellite dish. And the first thing I found on the satellite dish was HGTV, which back then was not the real estate pornography that it is now. Back then, it was all kinds of wonderful craft shows and stuff. And there I found this woman who I don't even think exists anymore. I'm just teasing. Alex Anderson. And she had a show called Simply Quilts. And I started watching that show and I thought, wow, this looks like it could be fun. So off to the store I went. I bought some fabric. I bought a really cheap, I think it was a Brother machine. That was my first one. And off I went, thanks to Alex Anderson, who I still watch.
You know, Alex has been a guest on this podcast.
I'm sure. She's
Yes.
everywhere.
She is indeed. And I think she would love to know the influence she had on your,
Well, I wrote
sewing.
to her. I wrote to her.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I became friends for a whole other mess of stuff in quilting to Liza Lucy.
Sure.
And
With Kaffe Fassett.
exactly. And we became friends online.
Mm-hmm.
And when I told her the story about Alex Anderson, she gave me her email address. And I wrote to Alex and thanked her for but I've never heard back from her. But I assume, knowing her influence, that she gets many thousands of letters all the time.
She does. She does. So you became a part of this amazing community. Your father was an influence on your sewing, as was Alex Anderson. Harvey, your quilts tell stories,
Well,
and
now they do. Now they do. But I didn't start that way. I mean, and that's I think something that's really important for all quilters to think about.
mm-hmm,
I started the way most people start, doing the simplest kind of quilt you can do, and I started with really traditional stuff. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I finally just started letting loose
mm-hmm.
and experimenting. So yeah, so now I tell stories with my quilts. But every single thing I do is an experiment.
So tell us about your first quilt.
My first quilt, which I still have, don't we all still have our first quilt?
I believe so.
It was, I think it was from Alex Anderson's TV show, and I think it was called Strips That Sizzle.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
I do.
That concept? And so I think I bought a bunch of red fabric and a bunch of blue fabric, and I cut it into strips, and I did, as told, and made this quilt, which I then found somebody to quilt for me. It was a woman. I had to mail the quilts to her, and she would mail them back, and I did that for many years.
So I want to go back to the storytelling. You grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn,
Yes.
in a very conservative Jewish household. Did that cultural background influence your storytelling?
Well, I wouldn't call it. Okay, my father grew up in the Catskill Mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and his mom died in childbirth, so he was put in an orphanage. So he grew up in an orphanage until he was 13. At which age, in the Jewish tradition, you're an adult. So then they
Mm-hmm.
throw you out. So family was a very, very important thing to my father, and And so the rest of the world could be the rest of the world. The family stuck together. So I don't know that we call it really conservative as much as introverted. I don't even
Okay.
know what I would call it. But anyway, and then my mother had to quit school in junior high school because she was the girl in the family. And it was all about her younger brother getting whatever money they had to send him to college.
Mm-hmm.
So he became an engineer, and she worked whatever job she could work, but she quit in junior high school. So education became incredibly important to her. Culture was incredibly important to her. She actually went back to school when I went to high school. She went to high school. When I went to college, she went to college. And she went on to have a career in education. Um, so that was the sort of, they took us to museums. They took us, my brother, I have an older brother. We went to Broadway shows almost every weekend. We were culturally ignited, shall we say. So it was not a shock that my brother wanted to be a rock and roll musician and that I wanted to be a painter. He eventually figured out if you were a lawyer, you could probably get into show business a lot easier. And so he went that way. And like I said, I followed my bizarre path the way I followed it.
So you were talking about your path and your father, Irving, who was raised in an orphanage, and the way you hear, I hear this, Harvey. Family is everything. You all were close.
Yes.
You just moved as a unit. How did that shape your sense of belonging in the theater world, where found families are often created?
Well, it's very true. In theater, we are very much family. There are still a lot of actors who call me mama. There are a lot of people from doing shows like Hairspray or whatever. And then there are a lot of actors who call me Papa from the years that I played Fiddler on the Roof and played
Mm-hmm.
Tevye. So those are families that we have, those chosen families. But the same thing is true in the gay community because when I was coming up, of course, being homosexual was still very much against the law. And we had a sort of hidden community. I was never in the closet. My generation, I came out really early, but I always had the feeling that I had to be who I had to be. Um, Many of your audience may know from my show La Caja Fall, the song "I Am What I Am," uh, and that sort of is my philosophy. So I never hid. I was always out there in a community that we created. But the funny part is now that I'm doing so much quilting, I have this quilting community that I adore and that I'm very close with. I had a stitching bitch here just the other day.
I love that.
That is the proper term, isn't it?
You know, it is more than perfect.
So we
It
had
is.
we had because two of my friends that don't live very close to me, two of my stitching friends, wanted to see the machines that I arranged to get through Bernina, and
Mm-hmm.
so we had a stitching bitch here and played with thread, trying to get 8-weight thread to work
Mm-hmm.
on a
And
long
how
arm.
did that go?
Very badly.
Okay.
You've we've all seen birds' nests. This was like an eagle's nest on the back of what we worked on. Last year, at some point, Liza Lucy was working on a quilt that she just loathed, and she put it in a box and mailed it to me and said, "Here it is. You use this for practicing quilting." And so I have that on a set of zipper to put right on my frame, and I can throw that on and experiment on that all I want. It's a pretty horrible looking thing now, but we put that on, and we got size 12 to work really well,
Mm-hmm.
12 weight, but the 8 weight is still hard. Though I understand, and I'm going to try it this week, if you put the 8 weight in the bobbin and do bobbin work instead,
Mm-hmm.
where you're actually doing your design upside down. Have you ever tried that?
I have not, but we're going to have to keep in touch because I want to know how this all works out. And I think our listeners are going to be curious too.
Well, it's an interesting idea, isn't it?
It is.
That you would draw, because we're talking about free motion quilting, of course, on a long arm, which I sort of think of as a big pen, and I draw with the needle. So you're going to draw upside down, knowing that the design underneath is what is going to come out.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say, that 8-weight thread comes on such tiny spools that just experimenting for 5 minutes uses up an entire spool of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very frustrating.
So you're talking about experimenting,
Yes.
and that has really been a theme across many things for you. But I want to talk about your quilting experimenting. Do you
Okay.
have a favorite fabric, textile? What just? And I know that this is meditation for you. So just talk about when you're working with whatever it is that you enjoy the most, and what that's like for you.
Well, I have only one rule at the moment, which is I'll do something very challenging, and then I'll do something silly. To let my brain. In other words, I'll do a quilt that really challenges everything that I know and learn more, and then I'll do something that's easier just to sort of wind down again. So I am enjoying very much couching using a macrame thread that
Mm-hmm.
comes from Mexico. It's a size 12 in that macrame thread, which is the thickest they make, and it does stitch down really well. Um, you have some. I mailed you some photos so you can look at them and, and,
Mm-hmm.
and see. But I love the dimensionality and the boldness of seeing that macrame thread on the top surface. So I can quilt I can take a quilt and I can quilt the whole thing in thread, and then I can go back and draw with the macrame thread, macrame couching over the
Mm-hmm.
top. I like that a lot. Then when I discovered that the 12 weight was easier because it's thinner than the cording, I did a few quilts where I just drew whatever I wanted. I think I sent you a couple of those,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that. So that's on a single sheet background. So like I'll take a big well, well, as nuts as I am, I only do king size quilts. it's yeah, I'm just drawn to big pieces,
Uh-huh.
and I want to be able to cut it down if I have to. So I might as well start with king size. So I usually start with 108 inches by 108 inches, um, and put that on the frame. I'll put backing on. I'll put my batting on, and I'll put a solid piece of fabric over the top. Then. Well, there's lots of things that happen then. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
sent you one of those quilts that's just me drawing in different colors and just drawing whatever comes to mind. Sometimes I will do a drawing on this. One quilt I sent you was my dog baying at a full moon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that one I drew I made a sketch first on paper. Then I put paper up on the wall, the size of the quilt, and drew it out fully on that to see that I liked the composition. Then I ripped that down from the wall. I put the fabric up on the wall, and I used a chalk pencil. It's like a mechanical pencil that has chalk instead of lead.
Mm-hmm.
And I draw with that because then I can just take a wet cloth and wipe off whatever I drew. So I drew the whole design on that, and then I put it on the frame, and then I began to paint it. That if you look at that quilt, the sky alone was, I think, 23 hours of of free motion quilting.
Is that your favorite quilt?
No, I don't
Okay.
have favorites. They're like children.
Indeed.
They're a
Indeed.
favorite when you finish it and you
Uh-huh.
put it up on, and I put it up on the wall. Like I have, I just finished one that was a sort of tribute to these crazy winds we've had lately.
Mhm.
Well, what happened was, once again, her name is going to show up in this a lot. Liza Lucy, she does all these quilts for Kaffe, and and has to make the quilts because they put out at least one book a year. And so she has all these quilts to make, and she can't repeat fabrics because it's always about the new line. So she ends up with tons of scraps,
Mhm.
which she then shoves in a box. and, and there are a few of us that get these boxes of scraps. I think there are 3 people that she sends them to, and I'm one of them. So I'll get a box of her scraps, and I'll sit down and sew them all together and make a quilt. I sent you a photograph of the first box that she sent me, which was mostly 1-inch squares.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
for that one, I took I put the backing, I put the matting, I put a sheet of gray fabric over the top, and then I sewed, quilted as you go, just applique, raw edge, applique those thousands and thousands of tiny squares onto it.
It's interesting to hear the word choices that you make, Harvey. When you talk about this, you're talking about drawing and creating, and I'm seeing that illustrator that you wanted to be so many years ago is really who you are today. You're illustrating through your different quilt creations.
Exactly. You are. But the same can be true of acting. And this, because you're telling a story when you're acting, you're telling somebody else's story. And the same is true of my writing. When I'm writing, obviously I'm storytelling, and taking on different personalities and stuff. I don't mean this as a criticism of anybody, but I don't understand people that don't do more than one thing. I think, I think you have to, because you can get so
Hmm.
stuck. I do have friends that bake only bread.
Because they're good at
And I sort of,
it.
because
Yeah.
they're good at it. But and I guess there's always something new to learn about a different kind of flour or a different method. This and trying different temperatures, but still, I want them to then take that bread and make a
Hmm.
sculpture out of it, or see what you can stretch yourself to do. I just I just think that keeps you alive.
I'd like to just switch tracks here just for a moment and talk about some of your theater work and the costuming that was designed for you. You worked with some amazing designers. Is there any one costume that was created for you that holds a special place in your heart, or have you kept pieces of any of these?
Oh gosh, the thing about theater is that it happens in that moment and then it's gone.
Hmm.
You do that performance, and that performance was witnessed by however many people were in the audience, and then it's gone. You may do that show 8 times a week, but they're never exactly the same. And jobs are finite. That you only stay for so long. I think that creates an atmosphere where you want to cling to something,
Hmm.
to have to
Sure.
have to have that thing. And unfortunately, I do have a lot of shoes. um, I have shoes from roles. A lot of the clothing I've let go of, but the shoes seem to stay. And possibly because my feet are so awful, and every pair of shoes for a role are made for you because mostly you're dancing in them. So they have to fit you exactly right. So I do have a lot of shoes, but all costumes, it's a collaboration between your hair, your makeup, your costumes, the choreographer, the director, it is so communal.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as a Broadway star who goes out there and does it on their own. It just, there's nothing. It's just can't be done. It's even if the person wrote the show themselves, directed themselves in the show, bought their own clothing, there's still a person who turns the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
There's still the person who does the music. It's just the most communal thing there is, theater. It's very much like a religion. It's very much like going to church or temple, that community thing. Well, I'll give you an example. If I go into a theater and the lights go down and there's an empty stage when the lights come up and a person walks out in the middle of an empty stage and says, "What a beautiful day it is here in Sweden." The audience says to themselves, "Okay, we're in Sweden and it's a beautiful day, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And then, so right away, you're all in the same fantasy together. On the other hand, if you go to the movies and a face just shows up on the screen and says, "What a beautiful day it is in Sweden," you go, "I don't see it."
Interesting.
You've got to see it in a movie. You have to show them the beautiful day. You have to show them you're in Sweden, or put up a little sign that says Sweden. Theater is an act of faith, and that creates a different kind of thing. You asked about costumes. Costumes just help in the storytelling. Um, I have lots of favorite costumes. I have some that I have never let go of, but I just gave 3 costumes from when I performed in La Cage aux Folles. I just gave 3 of those costumes to an organization to sell
Mm-hmm.
for a charity auction to raise money for political candidates. So I do let them go, but they do seem to mount up.
You have painted very beautiful pictures of the difference between being in film or being in the theater, and you've done both, and many notable roles. Your favorite theater, films?
I hate film. I hate television. I mean, I love seeing the stuff. I don't like doing it. I don't like sitting around and waiting for, and you have no control over your performance, really. Because an editor comes in, the director comes in, they decide what they liked or whatever. Theater is
Mm,
very different.
mhm,
So I don't have favorites. I have favorite memories of doing movies or whatever.
mhm.
Um, but and I never watch them. That's what I love about theater. Also, is you're not even tempted to go back and watch them because there's nothing to watch.
Mhm.
It's an empty theater now. Um, but I do have favorite roles. But what's the difference?
Well, so let me ask, favorite movie moments, favorite roles? Because I know that that's what our listeners are thinking. Well, what are those?
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't. I really don't have them. I,
Okay.
like I said, I have memories of doing the movies. Of
Mhm.
hanging out with this one or that one. I mean, I just told a story the other day about I made a movie called Death to Smoochy, which is I think a rather big bomb. Starred Edward Norton and Robin Williams, um, and I had a scene because we shot in Times Square in the middle of the night, and of course there was a blizzard, so you couldn't see anything out the way. We were in a limousine. Edward Norton and I were in a limousine, but you couldn't see anything. We could have been in somebody's garage, you
Mhm.
know. But here we were, this $1 million set of Times Square, and you couldn't see a thing because we were in a limousine. I made a movie once with Diana Ross, and a similar thing happened. We were in a limousine. I don't know why. Maybe I just like sitting in limousines with big stars. I don't know, but
As
we're in a
long as the heat's on in a blizzard, you're okay.
well, this wasn't a blizzard. This was a rainstorm.
Oh,
So
no.
Diana
Uh-huh.
Ross and I are sitting in the back of a limousine outside a disco where we were supposed to be going in to see her daughter, played by Brandy, perform. And this rainstorm happened. Well, Diana Ross is not going out with that hair in a rainstorm.
Mm.
And so and she wasn't getting out of that limousine. So I got locked in the limousine with her for about an hour and a half. Just the two of us sitting in a limousine. Once again, not a moment that anybody else would ever see. But it was a lot of, it's a great memory for me.
Yeah, I'm sure we could do a whole nother episode on the amazing memories that you have of your career.
It's not quite the same as sitting in a sewing machine.
That's true. That's true. And now you're creating those good memories at your sewing machine. I want to talk, Harvey, about your memoir. I Was Better Last Night. First of all, how did you get that title for this? Where did that come from?
Because people, once again, a performance is a performance. It's that
Mm-hmm.
one night, and that's all there is. So, people come backstage and say, "Oh, I love the show," and you always say, "Oh, I wish you had seen it last night. I was so much better last night." and I thought about that when I was writing the autobiography, and I thought, as we get older, isn't it true we were better, still better last night? I don't know. I just thought it was a funny sort of concept of judging yourself.
Well, and in the book, you say that early on, mainstream theater didn't know what to do with you.
Oh, that's true.
Um, was was there a particular moment when you realized you were finally accepted?
um, I'm such an innocent in so many ways. That I mean, I let my first show that arrived on Broadway was Torch Song Trilogy, and
Hmm.
I only let it move to Broadway so it would close because we were playing off Broadway and it was sold out. You couldn't get a ticket. It was in a tiny theater, and we were sold out 6, 8 months in advance. And I said, I'm going to be stuck in this thing the rest of my life if I can't find a way out. And
Hmm.
when they offered to take it to Broadway, I thought, great, I'll have a Broadway credit. I will have had a show on Broadway. I mean, which puts you in a very elite group of people, and the show will close because
Hmm.
Broadway audiences are not going to go see this show about a drag queen. So I let it move to Broadway, and it ran 5 years.
Hmm. Yeah, your plan did not work out.
My plan did not work out, but I left the show because I had another show opening called La Cage aux Folles. But I came back to it. I went and came and went.
Hmm. Well, let's talk about Torch Song for a minute. We talked about your father before. Your mother, Jacqueline, came to see you in Torch Song and in 1978 and noticed, Harvey, that you were wearing earrings that she had been missing.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Well,
Yeah.
how did that go?
Oh, it went fine.
Hmm.
It's sort of funny. You know what a memory jar is, right?
Yes.
Where you take like plaster or whatever, you put it around a jar or whatever, and then you stick things into it, into the sides of it. I don't know where the tradition started, but it's another one of those craft things. So I have a friend, and she and I this winter went and pulled out all kinds of stuff to make memory jars. We haven't done it yet,
Hmm.
but in that, my mom passed about 6 or 7 years ago, and so I have my brother's wife took all the good stuff, and I have all the junk jewelry. And so
Hmm.
so a lot of that stuff is there. So it's funny you asked about it because I'm about to make something out of her junk jewelry.
Well, I will want a picture of that. So, and we'll add that to the website with all the pictures of your quilts.
All right,
Success.
success.
Why have you been so successful?
That is not something I can really judge.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I do what I do. And then if people like it, they like, I mean, shows that I've written that were bombs could be closer to me than something that was a hit. Just whether it reverberates at that moment with an audience, you
Hmm.
know. I'm trying to think of terms of quilts. Think of those women that did the G's Ben quilts.
Oh, sure.
I don't
Hmm.
think any of them sat there saying, I'm making modern art.
Hmm.
They were making quilts. And they were having fun doing it, and they did it in their way. Um, And one of my favorite quotes in an interview with the women of G-Span was the interviewer said, I just love how you're quilting in this pattern, and all of a sudden you change to that pattern, and the echoing is so beautiful. And she says, well, I just, when I get bored of one kind of stitch, I just do another. It just had nothing to do with design. I just got bored. I love that.
So there was no plan. It just went where she went.
Exactly. It went where she went, and that's the true artist mind, isn't it?
Hmm.
It's to open yourself up enough. Um, when Kaffe and Brandon were here on their last trip to America, I took a class with them. Um, I think most people agree that they're kind of color geniuses, and I took a color class with them because I was curious, and it was just so much fun to see how a different, here were my choices, because of course you have your own design wall, you're putting stuff up on your design wall, and then this other person comes by and just opens your eye to other possibilities. And that's the great thing to be able to do. If you're going down a path and you see a fork in the road, you gotta take the fork.
Hmm.
You gotta, and that's the fun of it. Like I said, that's the saying yes to life. That's the artistic choices. Um, Sometimes I'll say to myself, "Oh, but if you do that, you may ruin it." And then I'd say, "You know what? So you ruin it. It's a bunch of fabric and thread."
You talked about Kaffe and Brandon's eye for color, and they've been on this podcast. Their views are like none other. In that class, Harvey, did you learn something that you didn't expect about seeing color as it applies to your sewing and quilting?
Yes, but it was. I saw what Kafe would have done,
Hmm.
and I knew it's not what I would have done. Does that make sense?
It
It doesn't.
does.
It
It
doesn't
does.
mean that he was wrong, and it doesn't mean that I was wrong. We're two very different artists
Hmm.
and two very different people, and I really appreciated and loved seeing how he took what I did and twisted it around into something that he would do. But it then became, and I can send you a photograph of the quilt I made in that workshop. It's not a Harvey quilt; it's a cave quilt. He
Mm-hmm.
took it from a Harvey quilt and made it into a cave quilt, which
Hmm.
was absolutely breathtaking to me. That could that could be done. I'm trying to when he came to my house. Brandon Cave came to my house because there was a break between classes that he was teaching, and they wanted to see my work. And I put out a quilt. I didn't send you a photograph of it. That's one of my graffiti quilts. It's a whole cloth that I just go crazy on and just draw whatever I want. And we had it laid out on the floor, and a cave just pulled up a chair and just studied the quilt for it had to be half an hour. The rest of us were in a group talking and looking at other things and playing with fabric, and he just sat and stared at the quilt, and he was getting what he needed out of that experience, and that's so fascinating to me. Have you ever sat and stared at a painting in a museum, or um, and just let it all sink into you? Somebody else's brush strokes, somebody
Hmm.
else's color choices, somebody else's. You know, I, it's the way I feel every time I look at a Van Gogh.
Hmm.
I can stare at a Van Gogh or a Modigliani just for the colors alone for hours.
You know, you talk about these people who have had influence on Alex Anderson and Liza Lucy and Kaffe and Brandon, and
Right?
you have a sewing quilting community family
Yes.
that you have created out of you're creating with sewing. Is this family different than that of the theater, or is it close?
They're different. They're definitely different because they're different kinds of personalities. The people in theater are out loud, much more social.
Hmm.
Many of my quilting friends don't like people. They don't. They would rather be at their sewing machine
Mm-hmm.
or sitting with a rotary blade. I mean, you must know there are some people who only enjoy cutting fabric.
Sure.
There are some people who
Sure.
only enjoy choosing the fabric or enjoy it the most. That's what they get the kick out of. Other people love binding. Some people hate binding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very different kind of personality that's into those kinds of details. Theater people are very different creature. When you think that we work, especially if you're doing something like Broadway, we work 6 days a week. We do the exact same performance, or expected to do that performance 8 times a week for a year. It's like, can you imagine making the same quilt 8 times a week
Mm-hmm.
for a year? It's a very different thing.
When you do a performance 8 times a week for that long, how do you keep each one fresh, like it's the first time you did it?
That's part of the job. That is
Mm-hmm.
definitely part of the job. It's like making a quilt with 100 blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those blocks, you can get sloppy and the points don't match. See, I don't make those kind of quilts where the points have to match. You can see that by looking at my work. When points, I'll tell you a funny story. So one of the women in my life came over the other day and brought me a small quilt that she made. Must be about 3 feet by 4 feet, and it was still on the zippers, for the machine. And she said, "Would you Harvey ties this?"
Interesting. And
I said,
that is?
and she said, "Could you turn this into a Harvey quilt?" And I said, "Well, I don't know that I could turn it into a Harvey quilt, but I could add to it some of my touches." And that's what she wanted me to do. So I sat down and that's what I did. I added elements that she would never go near or whatever. So, but I did it mostly in raw edge quilting. So I'm getting to the point of this story. I swear I am. So, so her points are so perfect. Her quilting is so perfect, and her piecing is so perfect that when my needle hit the center where she would have like 6 fabrics coming together, my machine got stopped. It just died. It just
Uh-huh.
went, "I give up. This is too hard." Um, and I laughed because I've never had so many pieces of fabric come together that it would stop the machine. Um, and I said, there's a large difference between me and this other quilting person. Her points all matched up every fabric. Oh, she's great at that.
I want to talk for a minute, and you alluded to this earlier in our conversation about where you live, Ridgefield, Connecticut, and it's your adopted hometown. You love it there.
Well, I've been here 40 years. I better like it.
You obviously do. What drew you there, Harvey, and how's it influenced your creative process?
Well, like I said, I grew up in Brooklyn, and then when things started happening, and I had enough money to get an apartment, my press agents had this house up here in Connecticut, and I used to come up here on weekends, and she said to me, instead of worrying about an apartment in the city, why don't you get a house in the country for the weekends? You could always rent an apartment in the city, but you seem to really like being out of the city. And so I bought this house in Connecticut, um, on top of a hill, looking out at a beautiful view of hills far away. And I've been here 40 years. I tore the house down about 20 years ago and built a
Hmm.
new house on this exact same spot. But I obviously must like the spot. But I created, I created a home. I said to the architect, I've always wanted to live in a theater or a church or in a barn, that kind of an open space.
Mm-hmm.
And so we created this barn. It's based on a New England tobacco barn. Basically, I live in one room. It's a great big room, but it's one room.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have Then I have like a little separate building, but it has a hallway that leads to it, which is my bedroom. And then under the main space of the barn is my studio where I paint and I make quilts. I have my long arm there and my other machines.
It sounds like the perfect place to create and just stare for a while till you get your ideas.
Yeah, well, it is for me,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, but space has changed because I
Sure.
built this house with an office. And in a funny way, you don't need an office anymore because everything has become so tiny.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need big. When we designed the office, I had these big file drawers, to keep scripts in and things like that. But everything's on a computer now.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Mm-hmm.
file drawers are filled with garbage. Um, I have, even in my living room, I have these drawers that were built in for DVDs and CDs.
Oh yes.
It's like, so those are empty.
Mm-hmm.
So life, the world changes
Mm-hmm.
around you.
One thing I want to make sure we touch on is that you often have said, as much as it hurts, tell the truth. Where did that philosophy come from?
Um, I was leaving the house. I was a kid, and it's in the book. What's fabulous about writing a book is that you remember all these stories, you put them down on paper, and then you're free to forget them. So I don't remember that. I don't remember the details at all. But I had something I wanted to sneak out of the house and take to school with me. And I had it behind my back. And I think it was my father that said to me, if you have to hide it, you shouldn't be doing it.
Hmm.
And that became a big part of my philosophy. And part of why I never was in the closet,
Mm-hmm.
because I never felt I had to hide who I am. My work has been banned in the Kennedy Center now. You
Hmm.
cannot perform a piece that I've written. My books have been banned in schools. I haven't heard of anybody pulling them out of public libraries, but I know that books of mine have been taken out of schools. I have a children's book called The Sissy Duckling, and I know it was banned in several
Hmm.
school districts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's
Indeed. Harvey, what's next for you?
I go to Pilates in half an hour.
Now that's literally next.
That's literally next.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then, yeah, I mean, isn't that what life is like? I finished, I had started telling you before. So Liza sent me this box of scraps, and I finished this other quilt, which was more difficult. It got me banned from one of the pages of Facebook last week. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you saw that. I call it the Blue Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was and I'm so proud of the quilting on that. Um, it's all free motion quilted, and it's the whole quilt is it's a black fabric, and then there's a boy that's cut out in turquoise fabric that's raw edge applique on, but everything else is done in Omni. I did it all in Omni,
Mm-hmm.
variegated Omni, and just free motion the heck out of it. And like I said, it got banned several places. So I decided I would do something simple. So I sat down and I made this whole quilt out of Liza scraps. Looked at it and said, "It's just a bunch of scraps." And then
Mm-hmm.
I had this idea because the winds were blowing so heavily here. I think you had storms also, didn't
Oh,
you?
we did. Yes, we did.
And so I thought of these African wax prints that I have that have these spiral shapes. You have you used the African wax prints?
I have not.
But do you know what I'm talking
I
about?
do. I
Okay.
do.
So I pulled out a bunch of them and I cut out the circles that were these spirals and I made a design of them on top of the scrap quilt. I raw edged
Hmm.
and then I quilted over the entire thing, and I have this wonderful quilt that I call Spring Winds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's who knows. So and at this very moment, I opened a drawer and found a whole bunch of jelly roll
Mm-hmm.
strips that
Mm-hmm.
I'll never use. because I like pulled them out. So I don't like that one. I don't like that one. So I'm actually forcing myself to make a quilt out of the Jelly Roll strips that I don't like.
So we know what's next. What's your dream?
Oh, I've so outlived all my dreams already. I mean, I'm very blessed in everything that life can offer, and I just enjoy myself. I just have a good time. If would I like to change the world? Yes, I would.
Mm-hmm.
I just gave a quilt to a women's program here for one of our local charities, not charities, but one of our local places, a women's center, for women who've been abused. And so I just gave them, every year I give a quilt to be auctioned off. You just do the work you have to do. So do I have dreams? Yeah. But right now you got to do the work.
In our conversation today, we've talked about many things. Is there a question I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
No.
Okay.
No, our conversation's our conversation. That's like there's a quote, a line of mine. I've got enough trouble with the what nows without starting in on the what ifs.
I love it. Harvey, it's been so wonderful to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I will keep playing with my Berninas. We didn't even get to talk about what those machines do for you.
Well, they're amazing. You own a 790 Pro, an L890, and a B08, I understand, at least.
And a Laura Star.
Ah, perfect. Oh, those Laura Stars are amazing.
Well, you know what it's great for? When I put, like I said, I'll put a whole cloth up on my design wall, and then I'll start cutting out these appliques, putting the binding on the back, not the binding, anyway, you hit it with the instead of having to iron it on for 5 minutes, I just hit it with a little steam from the oil, and it's just, there it is. It's there. I love it.
And we Bernina's just amazing, and we appreciate the fact that they make this podcast possible.
Yes, we'll say hi to everybody at Bernina for me. I do write with questions. I do send them questions all the time.
Harvey, if anyone listening today would like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Facebook or Instagram.
Perfect.
I'm on both.
Perfect.
I'm on both, and and then and we have our local shop. Our quilt shop is the Cotton Candy up in Brookfield. And now, of course, we're all watching Joanne's go out of business.
Indeed. Indeed. This has been wonderful, Harvey. Thank you so very much.
All right. Take good care.
And we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it. Another story about someone just like you. Someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life. It's a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.